That's right. In fact, that is exactly what Nehru believed in, a highly centralized polity. That's what he wanted India to be.
And Jinnah wanted
a federal polity.
Jinnah wanted a federal polity, a decentralized polity, because that would give Muslims the space
that
to be...
even Gandhi also accepted.
But Nehru couldn't.
Nehru didn't.
Refused to.
Well, consistently he stood in the way of a federal India until 1947 and became a federal India.
In fact, the conclusion of your book is that if Congress could have accepted a decentralized federal India, then a united India, as you put it, was clearly ours to attain. And you add, the problem was that this was an anathema to Nehru's centralizing approach and policies. Do you see Nehru at least as responsible for partition as Jinnah?
I think he says it himself. He recognized it. And his correspondence, for example, the late Nawab Sahib Bhopal, his official biographer, and others, he says, why did you win his query? These are very moving. His letter to late Nawab Sahib Bhopal is a very moving letter.
You're saying Nehru recognized that he was as much of an obstacle?
No, he recognized his mistake.
Afterwards. But today, Nehru's heirs and Nehru's party will find it very surprising that you think that Nehru was as responsible for partition as Jinnah.
I'm not blaming anybody.
That's just the
truth.
truth.
I'm not assigning blame. I'm simply recording what I have found as the development of issues and events of that period.
So when Indians turn around and say that Jinnah was, to use a colloquialism, the villain of partition, your answer is that there were many people responsible. To single out Jinnah as the only person or as the principal person is both factually wrong and unfair.
It is. It is not borne out by events. Go to the last All India Congress Committee meeting here in Delhi in the June of 1947, I think, to discuss and accept the 3 June 1947 resolution. Nehru's Patel's resolution was defeated by the Congress, supported by Gandhi. In the defeat, Ram Manohar Lohia had moved the amendment. It was a very moving intervention by Ram Manohar Lohia, and then Gandhi finally said, we must accept this partition. Partition is a very painful event. It's very easy to assign blame, very difficult thereafter, because all events that we are judging are ex post facto.
Absolutely. And what your book does is to shed light in terms of a new assessment of partition and the responsibility of the different players. And in that reassessment, you've balanced differently between Jinnah and Nehru.
So all vision, which is ex post facto, is 20 by 20. It's when you actually live the event.
Quite right. Those who lived it will have seen it differently, but today, with the benefit of hindsight, you can say that Jinnah wasn't the only or the principal villain, and the Indian impression that he was is mistaken and wrong.
And we need to correct it.
We need to correct it. Let's take a break at that point. I want to come back and talk to you about Jinnah and Pakistan. That's in a moment's time. See you after the break. Welcome back to Devil's Advocate, and the second part is this first special interview with Mr. Jaswant Singh on his forthcoming biography of Mohammed Ali Jinnah. Mr. Jaswant Singh, let's turn to Jinnah and Pakistan. Your book shows that right through the 20s and the 30s, and maybe even the early years of the 40s, Pakistan for Jinnah was more of a political strategy, less of a target and a goal. Did he consciously, from the very start, seek to dismember and divide India?
I don't think it was dismemberment. He wanted space for the Muslims. And in Pakistan, he could just not define Pakistan, ever. Geographically, it was a vague idea. That's why, ultimately, it became a multi-ethnic Pakistan. He had ideas about certain provinces which must be Islamic, and 1/3 of the seats in the central legislature must be Muslim.
So Pakistan was, in fact, a way of finding, as you call it, space for Muslims.
He wanted space in the central legislature and in the provinces and protection of the minorities so that the Muslims could have a say in their own political, economic, social destiny.
And that was his primary concern, not dividing India or breaking up the country.
No, he in fact went to the extent of saying, All right, we went to the extent of almost 20%. All right, let it be a Pakistan within India.
A Pakistan within India was
Yes.
acceptable to him. So in other words, Pakistan was often code for space for Muslims.
That's right. From what I have written, I find that it was a negotiating tactic because he wanted certain provinces to be with the Muslim League. He wanted a certain percentage in the central legislature. If he had that, there would not have been a partition.
Would you therefore say that when people turn around and say Jinnah was communal, he was a Hindu hater, a Hindu basher, that they are mistaken and wrong?
No, he was not a Hindu hater, but he had great animosity with the Congress party and Congress leadership. He said so repeatedly. I have no enmity against the Hindu.
Do you, as his author, believe him when he says so?
How do I? I don't live at the same time as him.
No, but you've
I
made an
go by what his contemporaries have said. I go by what he himself says, and I reproduce it.
Let's come to this business of using Pakistan to create space for Muslims. Your book shows how repeatedly people like Rajagopalachari, Gandhi and Azad were understanding of the Jinnah need or the Muslim need for space. Nehru wasn't. Nehru had a European inherited centralized vision of how India should be run. In a sense, was Nehru's vision of a centralized India a problem that eventually led to partition?
Jawaharlal Nehru was not always that. He became that after his European tour of the 20s. Then he came back imbued with as Lohiya and no, as Madhur Lemay puts it, imbued with the spirit of socialism. And he was all for centralized, highly centralized India.
And a highly centralized India denied the space that Jinnah and the Muslims were looking
because
for.
highly centralized India meant that the dominant party was the Congress party. He in fact said there are only two powers in India, the Congress party and the British.
That attitude, in a sense, left no room for Jinnah and the Muslim League in India.
That is what made Jinnah repeatedly say, but there is a third force. The Congress could have dealt with the Moplas and the others. There were other Muslims.
So it was this majoritarian attitude of Nehru that actually left no room for Jinnah.
It became a contest between excessive majoritarianism, exaggerated minorityism, and giving the referee's whistle to the British.
But was the exaggerated minorityism a response to the excessive majoritarianism
In
of Congress?
part.
In
But
part.
in part also a response to the historical circumstances.
If
that
the
had
final decisions had been taken by people like Gandhi, Rajagopalachari or Azad, could we have ended up with a united India?
Yes, I believe so. We could have. We would have wanted, Gandhi said, you British go home. We will settle this amongst ourselves. We will find a Pakistan. In fact, he said it until the last AICC meeting.
It was therefore Nehru's centralizing vision that made that extra search for a united India difficult at the
He
critical
continued to say so. But subsequently, after partition, he began to realize what a great mistake it had been.
He realized his mistakes, but it was too late by then. It had happened.
It was too late. I think the most moving example of the admission of that mistake, I'm not talking of his biographies and others, but a letter that he wrote to late Nawab Sahib Bhopal,
Where he accepts this quite clearly.
when I quote this in part, it reflects on the greatness of Nehru as an Indian individual, but it also questions the efficacy of the first Prime Minister of India.
Let's end this first interview there. Tomorrow in the second part, I want to talk to you about the relationship that you paint between the early Jinnah and the Gandhi and the questions you raise about partition and the predicament of those Muslims left behind in India. That's part 2 of this special 2-part interview. But for tonight, goodbye, good night.